Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, licensed attorney, crisis strategist, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we look for solutions for hot topics and controversies. We also seek insights from trailblazers who are at the forefront of advocacy. I am pleased to welcome Gretchen Carlson back to The Crisis Files. She is co-founder of Lift Our Voices and the former Fox News anchor whose self-advocacy is credited with launching the Me Too movement in 2016. Gretchen is here to share a first-of-its-kind scoring system to further demystify workplaces in the case file I call Corporate Scorecard. Gretchen, you continue to use your voice to fight for workers and enlighten people about what's going on in workplaces around the United States. To set the scene, in 2022, Lift Our Voices helped pass 2 laws that eliminated forced arbitration in sexual assault and sexual harassment cases. You told me in case file number 65, NDA busting, that your next big step would involve corporations, inviting them to open up and get better in relation to forced arb and non-disclosure.
Yeah, well, it's so great to be back with you. This is, an evolution of change. I never thought I'd be doing this work. But I took a really horrible experience of what happened to me at Fox News 8.5 years ago and, have parlayed that into making change for millions of other people because I realized that there wasn't just an epidemic of sexual harassment and misconduct still existing in our workplaces when I filed my case, but I also realized there was an epidemic of silencing the people who had the courage to come forward, and not just about sexual harassment, but about race discrimination, gender discrimination, disability discrimination, et cetera. And the way in which companies were able to have a clean record was that they started incorporating these silencing mechanisms, forced arbitration and non-disclosure agreements, at a rapid pace over the last 40 years. And so I realized I had to do something. And you mentioned those 2 laws that I was able to pass in 2022. They were so instrumental in forcing change because now you actually break the law if you use or try to force arbitration on people in sexual misconduct cases or try to silence them with NDAs. I mean, these are 2 of the biggest labor law changes in the last 100 years.
And they're so trailblazing too, Gretchen, because a lot of people didn't even realize they were agreeing to this when they start their jobs.
That's the whole problem. Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, some people on the other side say, well, you signed the agreement on your first day of work, so you knew you were doing this. Well, the problem is people can't afford, most people, to get a lawyer to read through all that gobbledygook, right? I mean, and even if they did, unfortunately, lawyers are also now sort of brainwashed into saying, well, this is just the way we work now. Yeah, you go to arbitration if you have a dispute. And yeah, you have to sign an NDA. The problem is that NDAs have become incredibly expansive. So 1/3 of all Americans on the first day of work sign an NDA, not just to protect trade secrets, which, by the way, I agree companies should be able to do, of course, but they're so expansive that on your first day of work, you're signing away your voice for anything that happens to you in the workplace. It's back S-words. I mean, it's totally crazy. So 10 years down the road, something bad happens to you and they say, oh, well, you're out of luck because you signed that NDA 10 years ago, so you can't talk about this. The same thing with forced arbitration. People have no earthly idea what that is. And it sounds good because people say, oh, it's cheaper and it's quicker and it's secret, so no one will know about it. And the problem is that you then go to complain thinking you're doing the right thing to HR and they go, no one will ever know about this because there's an arbitration clause. And it immediately kicks that into cycle. So you now cannot file a lawsuit publicly. That's what it means. So now you go to this secret chamber where your claim is adjudicated. But the problem is you only win 2% of the time. It's crazy. And it's secret. So the bad actor gets to keep working and you likely get pushed out. And this is the volatile, vicious cycle that has been going on in our workplace for the last 40 years. And the way in which these clauses have just become boilerplate. And nobody raises their hand and says, wait a minute, this is not just. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm far from done, because I believe that every protected class should not be forced into silence. So you asked at the beginning, so how do we get corporations to cooperate? And so we at Lift Our Voices have just launched this new index survey that's called Love Where You Work. And this is a survey that we're sending out to the top 3,000 public companies in America. And we're asking them, do you use forced arbitration? And do you use NDAs? And do you know about the laws that Lift Our Voices helped to pass in 2022? And we're hoping that for sure companies that are not silencing their people, we're hoping they'll fill out the survey right away, because we're going to compile a score. And those companies are going to get a very good score from us. And that's going to be a huge PR boon for them to be able to say, we're transparent. We don't silence our people, because we believe that's how you truly get to equity. Companies that are currently silencing their people, which are in the majority, we're hoping that this will be a soft nudge to them to, reach out to us and say, yeah, we're currently silencing our employees, but we'd like to work with you to get better at this. So they might initially not get a great score from us, but we're in this business to try to push companies along to get better. And it will also serve as an amazing tool for employees across our country who will be able to come to our website, liftourvoices.org, and be able to see this index. And so they will know, if they're applying for a job at one of these companies, they'll know whether or not they're going to be silenced there. And we think that that's crucially important as we become more transparent moving into 2025 and beyond.
How has the fact that we have so many more different generations in the workplace and such different, goals, maybe stereotypes from certain generation to next, how has that affected this work, Gretchen?
Yeah, without a doubt. Gen Z people, they want to work together. Younger people want to come together, men and women. They want to solve these problems. They don't want to be silenced. They are by far the most active in wanting to follow our advocacy. That phrase, can't teach an old dog new tricks. I mean, not to call us old, but I mean, it's harder to bring about change on any level when people are set in their ways. And let's be honest, people don't like change. For companies, look, this is a risk. Let's just face it, because they've been able to cover up their dirty laundry for a long time and still have a pristine reputation. The problem is now people are starting to understand what these clauses mean. And they're like, wait a minute, we don't agree with this. In fact, in the studies that we've done at Lift Our Voices, the majority of all Americans, Republican, Independent, or Democrat, they all say that people should not be silenced. So when people understand what forced arbitration and NDAs are, they disagree with them. And that research has been so compelling for us, because when you go to lawmakers or you go to companies and you try to enact change, they say, show me the numbers. And we've been able to now show them with our research that we fund. We've been able to say, look, the majority of your constituents, the majority of your workers don't want to be silenced. And so we often say the train has left the station. Companies, get on board with us. We'll help you become better. And Roshini, what we really want to prove through all of this, and we think we will, is that companies that don't silence their workers do better. And if that's all CEOs care about is the bottom line, then they should listen to us. Because every study shows that the more diverse your workforce is, the better you do. And we believe that these silencing mechanisms push out people of color and women at a higher rate. So let's end that. You don't want to do that. Even if you're only concerned about your financial status, then you should listen to what we're doing.
And one thing you and I talked about also in NDA busting that maybe even more people can glom onto is that many of us are 40 and older. And that is also one group, depending on which decade of that we get into, where age discrimination does exist. So regardless of your gender, your color, your race, whatever, age does happen to you. We will all get to be 40, 50, 60 and beyond.
Yeah, a couple of really important points about that. You work the majority of your years in a protected class with age. It's 40 and above. So when you think about that, if you come out into the world at 20, 21, 22, 23, okay, 17 years of not in the protected class and 35 years in it. So at Lift Our Voices, our third piece of bipartisan legislation that we introduced in 2023 is the Protecting Older Americans Act, which would also get rid of forced arbitration for age discrimination. It was the next group of people that, quite honestly, we could get Republicans to get on board with. And we need both parties to come together on this. Last May, that passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, where I testified a month earlier. And that was a huge victory. So we keep pushing along sort of in a staggered way to add in protected classes every couple of years. You know, it was my strategy from the beginning that if we tried to put everything in to start off, it would never have passed. There's just no way. So we started it piecemeal. So we got sexual misconduct accomplished. Now we're moving on to age. There's also a bill in Congress on race discrimination, which we fully support. So, you know, over time, we believe that we will be able to accomplish this for every protected class.
How do you keep the energy? Because this is not sexy work. Yes, you are on different news platforms and stages, and your headlines are all over, but it's really tough work that is being talked about. How do you keep that energy up, Gretchen? Because you could have just sailed off into the sunset after your own self-advocacy.
Yes, you know, I always credit my upbringing in Minnesota because I, learned that work ethic. And I had amazing parents who I'm still blessed to have in my life who told me every single day, you can be anything you want to be, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of hard work. And so that was instilled in me in a young age. And I've had to reinvent myself many times in my life. And I hope that my experience is inspirational to other people who are struggling because, oftentimes when we, especially women, reach a certain age and maybe we've spent time raising our family and we've been out of the workforce, it's hard to get back in and people say, well, what am I going to do with myself? And so look at what I've done. At 50, I had to make the biggest decision of my life to jump off a cliff and say, hey, I'm not being treated fairly. And I had no idea.
And you were at the top of your game. I mean, you were at a major network.
Yeah, I know.
In everyone's TVs multiple times a week.
Yes. And so biggest decision of my life, scariest decision of my life. So yeah, I could have just gone off into the sunset and spent more time with my kids and my dog. But I realized that there were these huge problems. And I hearkened back to the way in which I was brought up. And I realized I had a lot of work to do. And so I rolled up my sleeves and I recreated myself. Did I ever think in my mind that I was going to be one of the poster children for sexual harassment in the workplace? No. That is not something you aspire to on your resume. Did I ever think I was going to be instrumental in passing 2 bipartisan laws on Capitol Hill and become an expert at passing laws? No, but I've done it now. And so I continue to wake up every day with the glass half full. I think when you work in advocacy, you have to be like that, especially. But it's because of who I am inside of my soul that I never, ever give up. So I won't.
What is your advice for people out there who are just kind of learning about this when they're taking a job? Someone is watching this or listening to this, and they have really no idea what are the questions they should be asking before they sign on the dotted line.
Well, eventually when we start getting the results in from Love Where You Work survey evaluating the companies on their silencing mechanisms, you should first come to liftourvoices.org to look and see if the company that you're applying to is listed and if they silence you. And if that's important to you, then maybe you don't want to work there. I also encourage people to raise their voice when they see these clauses. And look, I know it's tough. I'm not naive. I understand that if you raise your voice, that there might be 40 people in line to take the job who aren't going to raise their voice. But the more that we start asking questions about this and become educated on it, the more we change it. And I always go back to paternity leave because it's one of the more recent sort of evolutions in our workplaces. 15 years ago, people frowned upon men taking paternity leave. They thought, oh, well, that's just the woman's work, right? And it was so frustrating. Now we have normalized paternity leave because more and more men started to take it. And that's a great analogy for what I'm trying to do. The more we start asking questions and saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we should go to HR as a group and say, why do we have these silencing mechanisms? And if it's not just one person, there's safety in numbers. So there's a lot of different ways to have your voice be heard in this space. And instead of just acquiescing and saying, oh, well, I guess this is the way it works, let's start to educate ourselves and to ask those crucial questions.
And those are really good questions to ask. I'm a big believer in transparency, maybe because I'm an ex-TV journalist myself, and transparency is so important. That has really gotten away from us, I believe, as a nation. What are some of the things that you've uncovered or discovered in this work when it comes to transparency that maybe might give us some insights as we're dealing with our own different workspaces or places, even involvement in volunteer opportunities?
Yeah, I would say that when a company chooses to silence its workers, especially in the way in which it's been happening for so long, where the workers aren't even aware of it, I think that getting rid of that and being more transparent is the silver bullet to equity. Because if you work for a company that silences you, it's not just about something bad that might happen to you. It's also about what you're being paid. It's also about whether or not you're going to get promoted. These are things that if you can't talk about them openly, we are never going to solve them. In Great Britain, they have a law now that you have to disclose what you pay people. Why don't we do that here? Why is it so tough to say that I'm going to pay my female gynecologist this salary and I'm going to pay my men gynecologist the same salary? Because that ain't happening right now. Why?
And that could win a lot of fans.
Yeah, of course it could win fans. I just don't understand. Some of these things are so easy to solve. And it's so frustrating that in 2025, we're still battling these things. So I really believe that my issues really get us to equality. Because once you can talk about your pay openly, once you see what other people are being paid, once you can come forward and not be chastised and thrown out because you're the villain, right? Once we start to change culture and how we look at all of these things, that is how we get to equality.
And that is powerful. And what I hope people also understand is true freedom is ageless, sexless, genderless, colorblind. True freedom, where you can just wake up every day, have that half glass full or very full attitude, walk into work, and know that you can just be respected, be affirmed, and there's trust in that environment. And that, I don't think it's idyllic. I think it's very possible that we can do that in the United States. And we're already seeing this in some parts of the world, too, already.
We are. It's really interesting. My movement in the U.S. has actually spread internationally. So there are very big efforts to get rid of NDAs in Australia, in Canada, in Great Britain, in Ireland. Forced arbitration, ironically, is an American problem.
Wow.
So NDAs are used around the world, but forced arbitration is this horrible little invention that America came up with. And people should understand that the original intent of forced arbitration was good, and it's still being used in this way. And that was for small business disputes, to unclog the court systems. So if I knock down my neighbor's fence and they owed me $300, why should I go to court, and fight over that and clog up the court systems for murder and rape trials? So arbitration was a way to mediate that little skirmish and keep it out of the court system. What happened was that companies and general counsel started realizing, wow, since it's a secret process, maybe we can use this for human rights violations at work. And that's when they started putting it in contracts. So in 1991, only 2% of Americans had forced arbitration clauses in their contracts. This year, 82% of all Americans are under forced arbitration. It has absolutely exploded, and still nobody knows about it for the most part. So we are on a massive education bandwagon. Some of the early results from the Love Where You Work pilot study showed that even among HR practitioners who do this day in and day out, there were incredibly low levels of the two laws that we helped pass. 77% of respondents stated they were unaware of the Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act and the Speak Out Act. How can that be? Like, you would think that the minute these kind of massive labor laws pass, that every HR department across America would get an alert and they would know that they would have to change their policies. But a huge majority don't even know about the laws. And that's the battle that we are up against in trying to make change.
So as we're in 2025 and beyond, what are some of the hurdles to getting more of these laws passed? Of course, we want the Love Where You Work index to just take off and all of these companies respond and get high scores from Lift Our Voices. But what are some of the real hurdles and how can people help?
Yeah, I'm also not naive to think that every company is going to respond, okay? And there's been a backlash, as we know, against DEI. There's a very right-wing activist who's been going to big companies to get them to take away their DEI initiatives and has been successful. I mean, Walmart was just it's the biggest employer in the US, just announced that they're taking away their DEI. So that's a hurdle. But we believe that our index is different from that because DEI is in its own silo. This is about every single American worker.
It really is. I mean, this is every job could be affected by this.
Every job could be affected. So we believe that we can stay away from that targeted sort of anti-advocacy. But the other hurdles, quite honestly, are the makeup of Congress. We are very tied to that. My issues tend to be more a Democratic issue. So when I had to pass my two laws, I really, really, really had to lobby Republicans because I had to get 10 Republicans in the Senate to overcome what's called the filibuster. Well, now in this last election, Republicans obviously control the presidency and they control the House and the Senate. So the Senate was Democratic when I passed those two laws and the House was Republican, but we were able to get them. That's going to be a hurdle, quite honestly. So I still pound the pavement for my age discrimination law and we'll still try to make great strides. And then the midterms come just 2 short years away. So we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, at Lift Our Voices, we are really going to readjust our strategy to go full throttle at the state level because we have been able to pass complete NDA bans for all toxic workplace issues in New Jersey, California, and Washington state so far. We have introduced that same legislation in New York and Connecticut. It did not pass last year. We are going back this year, and we are very hopeful that we will pass it there. And why is the state law important for NDAs? Because we have seen a massive domino effect in the states that have passed it. You have big tech companies that are based in California and Washington state. And when those laws passed, those companies were left with a huge conundrum. Should we continue to silence our people in states where NDAs are still legal, or should we change our policies for everyone so we don't have a 2-tiered system? And what happened was companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google, just to name a few, decided to change their policies globally. That was a massive victory for us, right? And so we're hoping that if we can pass it in New York and Connecticut, New York has the biggest employee base in the world. It has not only the most employees, but the most companies based in New York. We believe like that will be a game changer.
It will be a game changer. And hopefully these companies also see the win-win, the multiple wins that come out of this, the transparency, the really good optics, the good messaging, and just it's the right thing to do.
It is the right thing to do. And look, if anyone is running a company or works in HR or is general counsel listening to this, I know it's tough. Like, I know that there might be a few bumps along the road. Like, you may have to say, yeah, we've got a couple problems here. But instead of investing millions to cover this stuff up and buying insurance policies to protect your top leaders. So in case they have an allegation against them, insurance will pay for it. Like, that's costing companies millions every year. Why not change the way you look at this completely and invest those millions in being more transparent and keeping your workers happy? And
right, and I truly don't think it's going to increase the actual complaints. I think it helps people feel like they're more part of a team. I'm more valued here. I want to stay here. I want to be a brand ambassador, and not I want to sue the company or I'm afraid for myself.
Exactly. And the number one pushback that we get on that is, oh, well, then there's going to be all these frivolous lawsuits. Okay, let me denounce that right now, because I'm a person who came forward. It ain't fun. Okay? My life became an international story. My children became targets. They were only in middle school. Middle schoolers have enough problems, okay? It was a horrible experience. I would not wish that for anyone. So people who think that you're just going to willy-nilly say, hey, I think I'll make up these claims because I think it'll be fun, it's not going to happen. And research shows that 96% of all people who come forward are telling the truth. So, let's get on the right side of history here. Let's start investing our money in transparency instead of cover-ups, and change culture. I often say this, Roshini, and it's a very profound statement. Passing two bipartisan laws in the most hyper-political time of our generation was tough, but changing culture is harder, because it's so ingrained in us from a young age to think the way we do. And when we are born, we are innocent and we are transparent and we are non-judgmental. And we learn those qualities early on. And so like I said at the beginning, changing is so difficult. And we ingrain this in people from a young age to feel a certain way. So changing culture, it's tough. But changing laws is the start to changing culture.
Yes, and I remain a glass very full kind of person. And I believe 2025 is going to be that changing era where more people want not only to do right, but to have a good life. And it does involve all of us to get involved. Oh, my goodness. Gretchen Carlson, always a joy to have you on the Crisis Files. You can follow Gretchen on X and Instagram at Gretchen Carlson. Go to liftourvoices.org for more details about the Love Where You Work Index, as well as all the work Lift Our Voices is doing around the world. Such a pleasure, Gretchen. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Today's case file is powered by Asset HR. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com, for all case files and to drop me a line about topics you want us to cover in the future. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.